my sister was one homecoming queen when we were growing up. I was nominated, okay, and I didn't win. It's really a sad day, yes. This is when mommies come in handy, okay? Because I remember coming home and my mom she walked into my room and she's like, "You okay?" And of course I'm like crying, like, everyone told me I was going to win and I did. You know how that is, and your mom hugs you. So thank you, Mommy, for always being there. But because everyone told me, like, "Oh, I'm going to vote for you and you're going to win," Cheyenne came home and she's like, "Mom, everyone told me that I'm going to win." Okay, she goes to a school of, 2,000-3,000 people. And I'm like, and she's just kind of new there. This is her second year. And I have no idea how they even know her. Okay, so it was just kind of, in the back of my mind, I don't want to, discourage her, but I do want to, so I didn't say anything. I'm like, we're just going to pray. So that day that they actually voted, I asked Dusty, I said, "Dusty, did you go and vote for your sister?" "No, the lines were too long." No one I knew voted. And I'm like, okay, your sister's going to be devastated if she doesn't win tonight, so at least I can blame it on you. Oh, I was thinking something too. When I didn't win, I was driving and I was thinking about that scene when my mom walked in the room and I was thinking, wonder why I didn't win. And then I remembered what I was wearing. Okay, get a load of this. Must have been in a black pinstriped pantsuit. Okay, one that a man would wear. And I'm like, okay, now it all makes sense. Why nobody voted for me? Apparently I was challenged in the wearing clothes. Anyway, I have no idea why I told you that. Anyway, so we get to the game that night, and this is how I do football games, okay? I told Rob, this is how I know that I'm getting older. When I told him, I would rather be at home watching Blue Bloods than I would be at this game. So that's how you know that you're getting too old for this, is the thought of being at a game. So we get there, and the minute the game starts, I'm like, is it over yet? I mean, because I don't like it unless my kids are playing, and I can't wait till halftime when I know that we're going to be able to leave after halftime. So Liberty scores. Yay. Okay. Then the ball goes to them, and then there's an interception. The other team, we get it, we score again. And I'm thinking to myself, it's got to be almost halftime. Okay, I look at the clock. It has been 56 seconds. Okay, that's it. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be the longest game of my entire life. Okay, I'm going to show this to you. The sound isn't very good, and hopefully you hear. This was me taking it with my iPhone. She's the one in the black right in the front. That's the guy who wins. Oh, yay!
Let's have a huge round of applause for all the homecoming royalty.
Okay, so anyway, she won, and it really sets up what we're talking about today. Because she was so excited that night. It was like, yay, I won. And everyone, she actually got to go in the little car and wave her hand and do that whole thing. It was kind of fun for her. But I was really proud of her because she's just a good little girl. And it was fun to see that people voted for her and she didn't need to be like a drug addict and sleeping around and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of fun. But anyway, it kind of sets up for what we're talking about today because that night was a really, really fun, exciting night for her. The next day she wakes up and she says to me, her boyfriend called. She's waited all her life for her senior homecoming. And her boyfriend calls and he said, "I have the flu and I can't go to the dance tonight." Okay, now this was a big deal for her and she was so incredibly sad. And I said, "You know what, honey, that's just life." Okay, 1 minute it's like, yay, the next minute it's like, that sucks. I mean, that's just life. So let's just I hate that this happens to you on your, homecoming night, but that's just life. And I said, so your choice now, which is going to be our choice, is that when life is good and then it goes bad, we still have the option to stay in a line. Like we don't have to crash when things go bad, and we can live in a line like this when things are going up and down in our life. So I said, you know what, you need to either go there and do your little queenly duties, whatever that means, and you can be upbeat and happy, or you can be miserable and you can cry and carry on, and that's your choice. And it reminded me of today that that's always our choice too, that we can either look at things God is involved and he's got a reason for it, or we can just fall apart. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we told her to take off her crown and go clean her room. Okay, get the crown off. We're done. It was the cutest thing. She calls me that morning. Okay, she's in her room. I'm outside on the patio. She calls me. She's like, "Hi, Mom, can you come down to my room?" I'm like, serious? Go down there. She goes, and you'll be able to fill the blank in here. She goes, "Will you make me crepes for breakfast?" And I was like, serious? Like, how about just a Pop-Tart or something? Like, crepes are a big thing. And she goes, "But Mom, I'm queen." There you go. So she got crepes that morning. Anyway, all right, last week we talked about this word obey, because I told you I hate the word obey. We're trying to figure out what that means as a follower of Christ. If you are new here, we're working our way through the Gospel of Luke. Apparently not very fast. I cannot get off of this series, People Like Us. I keep adding more stuff because I'm learning so much stuff from this. And so last week we talked about the reason why we obey is not because God is up there saying, I hate you and I'm giving you these rules, and if you don't do it, I'm going to just whack you over the head. He does it because we're a family and he really, truly cares about us. And I thought about this when we went to a cabin this summer, and we would take the dogs for a walk. And we have this road that's kind of like a dirt road, and we'd let the dogs just run and they'd be free and everything would be fun for them. But once we got to the main road, it was like, okay, come back, stand right beside us because we don't want you to get hit. And as I was walking, I said, I think that's how God is with us. Like, he gives us this huge amount of freedom. Like, freedom wants you to run and go have fun and enjoy life and do all those things. But when you start getting too close to the road, I'm going to pull the reins in because I don't want you to get hit by a car. I don't want you to get hurt. I'm doing this for your protection. When we watched our grandson, I told you, we watched our 3 grandkids this summer. And William is our cute little 3-year-old that is, how do we say, what do we say William was? Val, you're here. What is William? Where is Val? Stubborn? No, we're she's on the hallway. She's probably going, she's talking about my kid again? William's the cutest kid. He's strong-willed. That's what it is. Okay, so Rob and I sit on the couch in the morning, and we have this lamp. It's a tall lamp, and it's all got like elk horns, okay? Every day, William comes in, he wants to crawl through the elk horns to us. And we keep saying, William, don't do that. Go around because you're going to hurt yourself every day, every day. Finally, the last day, he's like, nope, I'm doing what I want to do. Goes through there, pokes his head, okay, and starts crying. Okay, now, this is me being a grandmother. Serious? Did we not tell you not to do that like 100 times? Why do you not listen to us? Okay. And then I went over and hugged him, But it made me also think of God. Like, God's like, he puts fences and parameters because he loves us, not because he hates us. So I wanted to just remind us of that this week. Now, where I want to go today is this thought that just because we obey and do what God calls us to do, sometimes it doesn't go really well for us. And we need to understand that that's part of being a disciple and follower of Christ. That just because he says, hey, I want you to go do this, and we just assume it's going to all be smooth and it's all going to go great, and it doesn't a lot of times. And then we as followers of Christ are just totally confused. Like, but God, you told me to do this, and I did it, and now this bad thing's happening, and now I'm really, really confused. We see this in the life of Joseph in the Old Testament. He does everything right. He doesn't sleep with Potiphar's wife. He gets falsely accused and thrown into prison. And he's like, but I did the right thing. We see Abraham. God says, I want you to move, get into a new country. There's a famine. His wife can't get pregnant. Like, everything goes wrong. And he's just kind of a mess. And he's like, really, God? But you told me to do this. Noah, I want you to build a boat. Really? A boat? There's never been water. We're in the middle of the desert. And so for 120 years, he builds this boat because God tells him to. But the entire time, it's not like people are like, yay, Noah, you're so awesome. You're building a boat. They're like, you are a cuckoo nuthead, okay? You're crazy. And so for him, he does what God tells him to do, but it just doesn't go really, really well. And I know we always talk about little Saeed, who's still in prison in Iran. And it's kind of like him. Like, he's building an orphanage in Iran because he really feels like God's calling him to do that. And then they come, pick him up, take him, and he's thrown into the worst prison in Iran for his faith in Jesus. And you're like, really? Why does things like that happen? Now, World Evangelical Encyclopedia says this, and we got to get this in our head. Since the death of Christ 2,000 years ago, 43 million Christians have been martyred. That's a big number, okay? That's a lot of people that say, sign me up for Jesus, I'm going to follow him, and oops, I just lost my head, okay? That's just, and it gives us this idea that as a follower, when God tells us to do things, it's not always going to go good for us. And then we're going to have the choices of what we do with that. It says more than 50% of these people were in the last century alone. Every day, over 300 people are killed for their faith in Christ. Okay, so that's what we have to look, not in the United States, we're talking mostly in other countries, but that's what happens when people follow Jesus in a persecuted country. That's just what's going to happen. So I think what we need to get away from is assuming that when I come to Christ, everything's good. I'm just going to heaven. God's going to answer my prayers how I want. We're all going to be good. It doesn't happen that way. And as long as we know that going into this thing, then when things happen, we're going to be like, okay, I get that, and it's okay. Now, the problem that we see is that we see people doing really good things. We see them do God-honoring things, and then it doesn't go well because what we're looking at are the things that we can see. And what we need to start looking at are the things that we can't see. Brian Jones wrote a book called Second Guessing God, and in there he's got a chapter he talks about that God is always working upstream. And when the Israelites were crossing the Jordan, it was like the water was raging. It was like high tide. And God stopped the water, not right in front of them where they could see it, but like miles and miles upstream where they couldn't see it. So a lot of times when we have things that go wrong in our life, and we were just talking to someone today who, they just had cancer, and you're thinking, they just go, why? I don't understand that. I don't know. God's doing something way upstream that we can't figure out. As a follower of Christ, there's always a reason why he allows something into our life. And if we get that, then we don't have to fall apart when something happens. Like for Cheyenne, she didn't have to fall apart and cry. She's like, I'm sorry Grant's sick, and I'll do the best I can, but it's just life, okay? And we can't be so focused on the things in this life that we forget, that God has a purpose. So, when we obey, I want us to realize that storms are normal, okay? They're not something that's just shocking. It's something that's normal that's going to happen to us. And for you, it might be that, let's say you got married and you were like, my husband and I, we love Jesus. We're going to be in ministry. We're going to go to Africa and serve him the rest of my life. And he has a heart attack and dies. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is not how I planned our life to go. Or maybe you are just someone that got married because you felt like God was calling you to marry this particular man, and you had a bunch of kids with him, and he just walked in the door one day and said, I'm done. Walking out of here. And you're like, really? God, I listened to your voice years and years ago, and now you're doing this to me, and I don't even understand what's going on. Or maybe you were like, God, I want to work at this certain company, and I'm praying, and you open the door, and then 6 months later, you got the pink slip. Okay, all of this is just part of life, and it's part of being a Christian, and it's part of following Christ, and we got to get that, because so many people feel like, when I come to Jesus, everything is always going to go my way. And I just want you to know right ahead of time that it's not going to happen, that big storms are going to come into our life, and we're going to see that today. Now, the first place on your handout, we're going to go Matthew 14:22. In this scene, the disciples just were helping Jesus. He just fed the 5,000, which actually was about 15,000 that he fed. There's probably lots and lots of people. They all need to be taken care of. And then Jesus tells the disciples to go do something, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. So look at verse 22. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowds away. And after he had sent the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, and when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now, I would be frustrated because I would be out in the middle of the storm saying, but you told me to go and do this, and why would you tell me to do something when you knew, okay, you just fed 5,000 people with like a fish. Okay, pretty certain that you know the storm's going to come up in my life. Why would you send me into this storm? Especially when you knew we could have stayed and helped you clean up, and we could have helped you get to the other side. Because really, think about it. How's Jesus getting to the other side? Like, there's no helicopter, there's no boat. guess I should turn my phone off. That would probably be a really good idea. Sorry about that. We have a friend that loves golf. And his whole life, he just wanted to be involved in something golf. He worked for a company and worked there with the hopes that someday God would open a door. Well, God did open a door. And he ended up leaving the company because he felt so like, God, yes, this is exactly what I've always wanted to do. And he goes there, and within, I don't know how many months it was, the whole thing fell apart. And now we saw him at the store the other day. We were walking through, and he just looks dazed. And he's like, I have no idea what just happened, you know. And so I want us to realize that when storms come up, that sometimes God allows them and puts them in it for a really good purpose. Look at verse 25. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Okay, serious? Do not be afraid. Jesus, the wind, the waves, the water coming into the boat, we're like going to die. Why would I not be afraid? And modern day for us, that could be like, I just got a letter from the IRS. They're telling me they're going to take all my wages. It could be, I just found a lump. I just found out my husband's having an affair. Like for us, it wasn't a storm like that, but it was something that just knocks you over and you're just like, you just can't breathe, okay? And this is where the disciples are, and they're saying, and Jesus is saying, don't be afraid. And they're saying, but why? And here's what the word is that Jesus said to them. Because it is I. And if we can always remember that, it is I right in the midst of this storm. Jesus wants to teach them something so important that's going to quell all their fears, and it has something to do with, it is I. It is me. I'm here. I'm going to take you through this storm. You need to trust me. You need to quit worrying about yourself. You need to start looking to me. Verse 28. Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." So, what we learn from the disciples is that when Jesus says to do something, and we do it, and there's a storm, it kind of tells us something what he wants us to do. And that is to turn to him and say, "Lord, save me. You are my only hope in anything." Because really, honestly, Peter wants to save himself. Peter's like, I know the Sea of Galilee. I'm a fisherman. I've been in storms like this. I know this. I know how to swim. I don't know how to swim. I don't know. And God's going, and Jesus is looking at him saying, Peter, I want you to be completely deficient in your own life so that the only place you have to turn is to me. And the problem is that when things like that happen and when you do what Jesus tells you to do, it's like if you refuse to lie for your boss, let's just say, and you get fired. You're like, but I did the right thing. You break up your boyfriend because you know he's not going to help you grow spiritually. And you just feel like it's just not right and God's calling you to like walk away from this. But honestly, you know, the wedding plans were made or whatever. And now you're just kind of going, I have to stop everything and everyone's going to be so angry with me. But you're doing the right thing. Maybe your husband is all into like, hey, let's watch porn every night. And finally you're like, I just can't do that anymore. I just can't do that as a follower of Christ. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to go find a new wife that will. Okay, so we got to get this, that there's going to be storms. But when that happens, we have to learn how to completely and utterly depend on Jesus, not ourselves for what we think we need to do. It's like, God, you have to take it because I cannot do anything. And the words for I want us to learn is, Lord, save me, because I really believe that's why God allows storms in our life. Because I know for us, I depend on myself a lot. I just do. I think I can handle it, and yet God will take us to the point where we have no one else to turn to but him, and that's what he does to Peter. I think that the thing is that so many of us, we're going, you know, I can't conjure up love for my husband, let's say. I don't really like him, not sure I love him, and I can't conjure that up, and Jesus is saying, bring that to me. But I'm kind of addicted to food. Amen, I am on that. And God's saying, give that to me. Let me do it. To put everything that this problem in your life onto him and let him handle it, because that's what he wants Peter and them to know. Look at verse 31. Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took a hold of him and said, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Okay, now let me think a minute. I can just hear Peter. Well, let me tell you why I doubted. It's been kind of a weird few minutes, okay? A, it's a storm. B, you creepily came up and looked like a ghost. Okay, now I'm scared right off the bat. So whatever that looks like, I don't understand it. Now, I walk out there and then I'm starting to drown. And so, yeah, I was scared. That's why I doubted, because all of these things around me are pointing to, you should be scared, you should doubt, you should. And Jesus is going, no, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to look at the storm. I want you to look at me, because I'm the one who's going to get all of this all better. Verse 32. When they got into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "You are certainly God's son." Now look at the timeline. Go ahead of me, you guys. There's a storm. Jesus shows up. What does he do to Peter? He stretches his faith, and then he calms the storm. And see, a lot of us are in that stretches our faith part of this whole thing. It's like we're in the midst of a storm, and it's not going to get better until we learn what that means, that God is really big and he can handle all of these things. And he shows up for Peter in the storm and calms it, and that's what he does for us. But sometimes we have to go through a lot of stuff to get to that point. But I want you to know that that's normal and it's natural as a follower of Christ for God to say, I'm going to put you in a really bad situation so that you have no other option but me. That's a really good place to be. Now, it goes back to the original question. What if Peter never obeyed? What if they said, hey, Jesus said, hey, go over there. And he's like, I'm not doing that. No, you can't tell me what to do. Why would I do that, Jesus? And what if Peter never obeyed, then he would never, ever have seen that God is that big and that Jesus is that powerful that he can calm the storm. So a lot of times we don't obey and we don't get the blessing from understanding what we can learn from that whole thing. Because what he learns is that Jesus is in complete control over something like the wind and the waves. And if he's in that much control over that, he can pretty much handle anything that you and I ever could go through. George Mueller was an evangelist, and he opened an orphanage in the 1800s. And I'm sure, just like most of you here, you felt like God called you to certain things. And he really felt like God was calling him to open this orphanage. But one day there was no food, none. And he had 300 kids to feed. And look at what, which I would say is a storm, but look at what happens. The children are dressed, it's in your handout, the children are dressed and ready for school, but there is no food for them to eat. The house mother of the orphanage informed George Mueller. George asked her to take the 300 children into the dining room, have them sit at the tables. He thanked God for the food and waited. George knew God would provide food for the children, as he always did. Within minutes, a baker knocked on the door. Mr. Mueller, he said, last night I could not sleep. Somehow I knew that you would need bread this morning. I got up, make 3 batches for you. I will bring it in. Soon there was another knock on the door. It was the milkman. His cart had broken down in front of the orphanage. The milk would spoil by the time the wheel was fixed, so he asked George if he could use some free milk. George smiled as the milkman brought in 10 large cans of milk. It was just enough to feed the 300 children. And I love that story because it says, you know what? There is a storm in George Mueller's life. And he's like, I have no other options but you, Jesus. And with George or with the orphans or with Peter or the disciples, they never ever knew that God could come through unless they were put in a situation that would prove that. And so we need to start looking at the things that come in our life completely differently, not like, oh God, why are you doing this to me? My life is so miserable. Instead, God, I want you to show me who you really are. Okay, it's freezing in here. Yes? I don't know what that is. We do this all the time. Are you cold? If someone can just tell them out there to just shut that thing off, I'm sorry. I can never get it right. It's hot in the morning in here, and then it's cold, and it's weird to see you put jackets on and look like you're freezing, and then I lose my train of thought, and I'm all confused. Anyway, so with each tiny step of obedience, they get to see how powerful God really is. And look at Matthew 15, where are we at? 32. Because this is the other part to this. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might faint on the way. And the disciples said, where would we get so many loaves in this desolate place to satisfy such a large crowd? And that's exactly what we're trying to say here, is that sometimes we have to be put in difficult situations where there's apparently no way out. Like, we can't get this better. And those are the situations that God comes in and says, let me do what I need to do. And in the process, you're going to learn how to trust me to where the next time there's a problem, you're going to be like, yeah, God can handle it. He's that big. He can handle it. Now, if you've been here for a while, you've heard us talk about this. It'll be a 1-minute thing, so you can sleep if you need to for this. But for those of you that don't really know us, or if this is the first time you're here, for us, we always have said this, we've always had a lot of money. Like, my husband has done very well business-wise, and we had money, and he invested it. We sold a company, invested it, and then he put it in the stock market and put it in, land and everything. And we just pretty much thought we would be set for life. We just never had to worry. We traveled, did anything we wanted to do. And then in the crash the last few years, okay, stock market's gone, land is invaluable or worthless, okay? And now for us, every last dime poured into our business that we had, and 4 of our kids were working for us at the time. Okay, so now we have payroll to meet, we have, and it's impossible. And I walked out to Rob, remember it was a May, and I walked out to him and I said, we have $262 in our account. We're done. Like, we have payroll to meet, we have American Express bills to pay, we're done. I don't even know what to do. And God was like, yay, perfect. Finally, I have you exactly where I want you. Because now you're going to quit trusting your bank account. You're going to quit trusting your money. You're going to learn to trust me, okay? It was perfect. It was the worst thing. Because for us, we had no backup plan, no secret savings account. We had a whole lot of people to feed and no bread. And I just think that God uses that to present huge problems to us to say, what are you going to do now? And every one of us are right there. It's like, what are you going to do? Am I going to cry? Am I going to roll up in a little ball and be depressed the rest of my life? Am I going to start drinking? Am I going to start taking drugs? Whatever. We all have those choices. Or we can say, okay, God, I give. I give. You just teach me what you want, and I'm going to trust you however that looks out. And I will tell you what, every single week we make it. And I can't even tell you how in the world we make it. When we first lost everything, we told the kids we had to go on a budget. Okay, try telling your 15-year-old that we're going on a budget, because they don't know what that looks like. They're like, what do you mean we can't go buy rock revivals for $150 a pair? They just can't even possibly fathom that. So I remember about a week into it, Dusty goes, what is this budget thing? And when is it going to go away? I'm like, I don't know. Hopefully soon, but it doesn't look like there's a lot of hope in that area. But I started thinking, what if we looked at every storm in our life like this? What if we looked at it like when something tragic happened or something unexpected or that phone call late at night that just jars you awake? And what if we just said, God, I'm just not going to fall apart. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to trust you. You've brought this in because you, like what he did with Peter, you're just trying to stretch my faith. And I want you to learn that. So our job is going to be to pray, but to really say, God, my life is yours, and you're going to teach me through this storm something really, really valuable about what it means to know you. I was thinking for those of you that have kids that are pretty on the wayward side, Rob and I was listening to, I don't know if most of you saw that Machine Gun Preacher movie, and it was really interesting because he had a little sister that I think, if I heard this correctly, she died. And before he was born, someone had prophesied over his mom and said, your next child will be a preacher. And for her, she had him. At 5 years old, another pastor came in and prophesied, said, your husband's going to be a preacher. And okay, the problem is, at 12, 13, the kid's a thug. He's a drug addict. He's the worst kid you can even imagine. Drugs, stealing. He was a gun. He for the people that are dealing drugs, he like bodyguard type work. I don't know what he did. Okay, this was a bad guy, okay, for 30 years. And I started thinking about the mom every day. Dear Jesus, you promised me that my son would be a pastor. Storm after storm. The police would call, we've got your son in jail. I mean, and you're just like, are you kidding? Like, where is the end to this? But you know what? 30 years later, God grabbed a hold of his heart and changed his life. And he is actually a preacher now. He's got a really cool testimony. But I thought about that mom was completely bankrupt for 30 years. She couldn't, coax him into coming to Jesus. She'd take him to church. Blank slate. See, when we realize that we have no control over our kids or our grandchildren or what they wear to homecoming dance. My husband, Cheyenne, walked out, and she's in this short thing with heels that are this high, and he calls me, and he goes, did you see what Cheyenne's wearing? And I'm like, no, I didn't. He said, she came out and said, how do I look? And I said, I hope you said you look awesome, because if you don't, you're going to ruin her whole night. Trust me, she's got shorts on or something underneath. So my dad sees her the next day. Why was her dress so short? I don't know. I can't control my kids half the time, okay? But we have to realize that in life, that situations are out of our control. But we serve a God that is really big and that he is control. And the more that our faith grows in him, because we see how big he is, then we're like, God, I'm giving you my kids, but you know what? They may not come to you until after I'm dead and gone. I don't know. I'm still going to trust that they're going to. But that's his deal, not ours, because I think that God does his greatest work on those times when we're like, I don't have enough to feed my family. I don't have enough to make our bills. And then that's when he can step in and do what he needs to do. Now, I always tell you this. I don't always. I've told you this a couple times because I always like to tell people this little story because I want you to see how awesome God is. It was, I don't know, quite a few months back, and our business pretty much was done. We knew we had a really big bill to pay the following week, and it was so big, there was just no way that we didn't know what to do, except we literally went to bed at 6 o'clock at night. I think that's called depression. But I was like, God, I don't know. I said, Rob, I don't know how God's going to come through, but he always does. Next morning, we woke up to an email. It was from a lady, and she said, yesterday, I was walking through my house, and God stopped me and said, not audibly, I'm sure, I want you to invest in their company. And she's like, well, serious? Okay, well, how much? And the number went right across her eyes. She said, I saw a number, which was interesting because that particular number, the day before, Rob said, if we had this amount of money, I know we could make it. And that amount of money was what crossed her eyes. And she wrote in, and I couldn't even read the email the next day because she was like, God told me last night that I should give you this certain amount. And I'm like, it was the exact amount that Rob had said. And so it was one of those things that I like to tell people that because I want you to know that God comes through. He really does. But he puts us through really bad, yucky situations so that we have nowhere to turn but him. And then when we do, like now, if we're running low on money or something, I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. God's going to do something. I don't know. I really trust him now. I don't worry. I don't stress. I don't fret about things because I just now have seen him. He stretched my faith so much during these last few years that now I just don't worry about stuff like I do. And for you, it might not be money. It may be just your, health or relationships. Things are just really bad right now. And God's just stretching you, saying, I just want you to trust me. Don't walk away. Don't run away. Just trust me. And I think because when we realize we don't have control, we begin to realize that God is in control. And we have a small view of God. And I think the more that we can trust him, it's easier when he becomes really big. So I started thinking about this the other day. God, in the beginning, God created. From nothing, okay? We think our problems are so big. He created this world from nothing. We're talking moon and stars and galaxies and ocean and waves and whales and mosquitoes and little cells on our body. This is an awesome creator. He's really big. We think, yeah, God's just up there and he doesn't really care. No, he cares. And he's a big God that cares exactly everything that's going on in your life and my life. And sometimes we don't think that. We think, yeah, he doesn't really care that much. No, he does. And we got to get that. I think about Noah. And here, God floods the world. Floods. Everyone's gone. Okay, that's a pretty powerful God. Sarah opens her womb at 90. Okay, I don't even want to have sex at 90, okay, let alone have a baby at 90. That just sounds horrifying, okay? But God's like, I'm going to open your womb. Like, we are talking a powerful God that says, I'm going to make sure you have a child. And you're way past childbearing ages. Joshua, he's in this battle. And he knows if the sun goes down, they're going to lose. And he stands there and says, God, make the sun stand still. And you know what? God did. No sun, he left the sun up, and it says it's the only time that's ever happened. But God says, that's how much I care about you, Joshua. I'm going to do something miraculous in your life. Lazarus, he raises him from the dead. He's been dead, 3 days, 4 days? And God says, come back to life. Okay, powerful, powerful God. And I want us to just get the picture that hopefully you know that nothing is ever out of his control. And our job through those storms is going to be to say, okay, God, I've never really trusted you for my finances. I've never trusted you with my husband. I've never trusted you with my relationship with my kids. I've never trusted you with my health. But you know what? Now I'm going to stop. As of today, I'm going to say, God, it's all yours. You're a big God. You do whatever you need to do to grow my faith and to make the situation be what you want it to be. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to go good. I will I'll make you understand that real quick. I read this funny thing. Because a lot of people trust the government right now, which is probably not a good thing. I found this cute little card, and it says, the only thing I fear more than the government shutting down is the government staying open. I thought that was brilliant. But anyway, I want to just tell you that a lot of times when we are praying for God to do something, I'm praying for someone to get healed. I know God's going to heal them, and then they die. I know, God, I'm praying for my marriage to be saved. And then your husband hands you divorce papers. So I'm just going to tell you that just because we believe that God can, sometimes he doesn't. And we see this in John the Baptist. Look at Matthew 11, 1 through 6. When Jesus had finished giving instructions to his 12 disciples, he departed from there to teach and preach in their cities. Now when John the Baptist, while imprisoned, heard of the works of Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, are you the expected one, or shall we look for someone else? Okay, now think about this. John the Baptist, who did nothing in his life except serve Jesus all of his life. He lived in the wilderness. He yelled at people all day long, repent, be baptized, you're going to hell. He was a crazy man, but he loved Jesus, okay? So this is someone who has devoted his entire life to him. And he wasn't living in a mansion. He didn't have an oceanfront property. This was his job. I am born so that I can share Jesus with this world that's going to hell. And now he finds himself in prison. And it's dark and dreary, and it's lonely, and he's got a lot of time on his hands to think, and he's saying, God, I'm really confused. Jesus, where are you? Like, I thought we were cousins. I thought you loved me. I thought we were in this whole thing together. And yet you're outside, and all these people are following you around, and like, yay, Jesus, yay, disciples. And I am sitting in a prison cell, and this is wrong, and it's not right. And you haven't even come to visit me. Why would you not visit me? Like, I'm your cousin. We were in this thing together. You haven't sent me money. Like, you should send me money so I can buy a TV, so I can at least watch the news and see what's going on, okay? But you apparently don't care because I'm in here and you're out there and you don't care. And I honestly think that every one of us has felt that way. We have felt like God has said, you're in this dark, dark place, and God is silent, and you're like, I don't know where you are, but I want you to know that John the Baptist, one of the greatest, they say the greatest prophet of all times, felt the exact same way. And for you may be sitting here going, you know what, I helped my neighbor when he was sick. I went to Bible college. I taught Sunday school. I told my kids about you. I helped the homeless. I visited prisoners. And now I found out I have cancer. How could you do that to me? I'm lonely. I'm miserable. This is just wrong. And with every crisis that comes into our lives, we are going to feel that doubt and that questioning. And I want you to know that that's normal, because the Bible says that it's normal. And once we get that, then we don't walk away from our faith. Look at verse 4. Jesus answered and said to them, go and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, the poor have the gospel preached to them. And here is the answer that Jesus gives to John. John, I hate to tell you this, and it's something you and I are going to have to learn. It's not about you any longer. When you sign up to be a follower of me, you have just signed up to follow me and be on mission with me. And that may not mean you always get what you want. I found this little e-card. It was the funniest thing. It's this mom. She's talking to her son. And she said, I am so sorry that you're mad because you found out the world doesn't revolve around you. She said, here, let me pour you a tall glass of get over it. Okay? And I started thinking, I bet Jesus feels that way about us. Like, I am so sorry that you feel that as a disciple of mine, that it's my job to just make your life happy all the time. It's not. There's going to be times when you're Saeed sitting in a prison cell in Iran. There's going to be times when you're sitting in a hospital room or a grave site. There just is. That's just life part of being a Christian. But here's what Jesus says to John. John, you gave your life for something. And this is what it was. Crippled people can now walk. You know those people that were lame and they never, they were sitting, they walk because of me. Remember how leprosy was such a big thing and it was the hideous and people had to be, I heal lepers now. Like people now have they're healed and they can live a normal life. John, remember those people that were like deaf? You could never hear a baby cry or a bell chime? Their ears are open. John said, remember Lazarus? Dead. Family devastated. I raised him to life. And John, remember those people that were really, really poor? They couldn't make it to the synagogue. And yet I came and now they can hear the gospel because I have been able to share that with them. John, do not focus on the here and now. Don't focus on what's going on here, but let's focus on eternity and what that looks like. I was talking to Dusty. I drive with him now because he's getting ready to get his driver's license. And I started thinking, I have 4 months to pour into his life because once he gets his driver's license, I'll never see him again. Like that's just how it works with kids that are 16. And I sat down with him as we were driving and I said, Dusty, I want you to do everything you can to figure out what it is that you can do because God is calling you to do something for him. Okay, at 15, they don't understand that. So I was reading a book, Stephen Furtick said this, I don't want my kids to survive the world. I want them to change the world. And see, that's the thing with us, is that God's saying, I don't want us to just be here and survive the world. I don't want you to survive that someone's got cancer. And I want us to change the world. I want us to be different, where we can take every storm that comes into our life and say, God, what do you want to use me so that I can make you known through this storm? But I think this is what we do. We need to pray that God will use us and our situations and our children and our grandchildren. A lot of us in here have kids and grandkids. I have this picture. We went to California this year. Took a picture of our whole family, which is my mom, my brother, sister, and it goes down from there. We have this one family that looks like we belong in a cult because every generation wore something different. So the generation that has about 30-some kids in it all are wearing white. Okay, so we literally look like we have. But that's my prayer now, is that God, would you take all of these 30 kids in this picture and would you use them to change this world? Because we have to get this, that as a disciple of Christ, our lives are no longer ours. And people don't like that. Well, yes, no, it's not. When we sign up to follow him, we are now on a new road. And it's like, okay, God, if that means I have cancer, if that means I have whatever you put into my life, I want my life to represent you. We want to be like John the Baptist in that particular place where he finally gets it. Because we have to realize, look at verse 6 with John the Baptist, and this is what Jesus' last words he said to him. And blessed is he who does not take offense at me. In other words, blessed are you when you don't walk away because things didn't go your way. Or blessed are you when tragedy strikes and you don't give up your faith in me. And blessed are you when you can still move on in your faith, even when you have heartaches and hurts and disappointments. And Jesus says, I want you to remember the past. Remember why you do what you do. Not going to be easy. And if we can get that, we are way ahead of the game. I tell Dusty and Cheyenne all the time, if you can get what being a follower of Christ is at 15 and 16 years old, you got life figured out. And for us, this may be new to us. And you're like, I don't even know what this means. But hang in here with us as we go through Luke, and you'll figure that out.